Hello and welcome to this special video interview with The Wire. I'm Jahnavi Sen, and with me today is Madhumita Murgia.
Hi.
She's the artificial intelligence editor at Financial Times and also the author of this recently released book, Code Dependent. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Your book is very interesting. It looks at how this technology has developed, but not from the perspective of those directly developing it, investing in it, propagating it, but from the many people whose lives it's impacting, some of whom who work in the industry, but perhaps without even always knowing that they're working in the industry, and others who come across it in their daily lives in so many different ways. One of the issues that I found very interesting coming up in it was what has been called data colonialism. We know AI systems need really tremendous amounts of data that goes into the training of them. Where is this data coming from? What does it mean for the people whose data it is? Do they know it's going in? Are they benefiting from what's happening?
Yeah, so this entire technology is built on data, right? And I talk about how this was actually the heir to social media in a way, because without data and the huge amounts of personal individual data that all of us leave behind as we interact with social media, we wouldn't have been able to build those businesses, which are essentially targeted advertising businesses, right? Whether it's Meta or Twitter or even Google, they are ultimately targeted, personalized ad systems. Mm-hmm. And now the next step and the next kind of big jump has been AI, which, as you said, requires huge amounts of data in order to be trained, in order to function at all. Yeah. And most of that is coming from us. All over the world, as we kind of leave behind these trails. It's in our interaction with any sort of online app, whether that's, where us leaving comments, reviews on TripAdvisor or posts on Reddit or YouTube comments, everything from that to the blogs that we write, videos, all of our online lives digitized are essentially the data that powers AI systems. In particular, when we talk about generative AI, which is the new wave that we're seeing over the last 2 years or so, many people would have interacted with that maybe through chatbots like ChatGPT. That's really based on internet data, right? And you ask the question of whose data is it and do they benefit? And I think one really interesting tension we're seeing is that a lot of that data is from creative people, things that you and I may have written, books, exactly. And none of those were paid for when the systems were built. But you're now seeing pushback from the creative industry, and not just journalists, but authors, musicians. The writers' strike in Hollywood was because those writers felt that their work had been appropriated without compensation. And now you're slowly starting to see big tech and AI companies recognize the need to compensate for that data. But this is, the voices of those who are strong, writers' unions and things. But what about those who don't have a voice? And so I write in my book, particularly in the opening chapters, about data labelers, who many of whom collect this data, label it in the global south, in India, in the Philippines, in Eastern Europe, who often never see the upsides of the work that they're doing, and who don't benefit in the way that tech companies do. So this concept that I talk about of data colonialism is really about how you have a small group of companies concentrated in one corner of the world, which is in California, who've built these enormous systems that are completely based on personal data of individuals. And that's not just collected from the US or the West, but from all over the world, because of how ubiquitous their services are, whether that's search services or social media. That's where this was built up from. And to add to that now, as we talk about generative AI, there's even more data being collected from around the world, whether that's, image, audio, music, video data. But even in healthcare, for example, you have companies like Google and others who are actually collecting data from here in India and using that to sort of train and inform their systems. So the idea was really to show how these systems wouldn't exist without the people in the global south and other parts of the world who give up their behavioral data, but who also work to collect it, on behalf behalf of these companies and are part of the supply chain of AI development, but never see the benefits of these technologies, because obviously all of the wealth that's being accumulated and created is done in the West, and very rarely are ASHA workers who are collecting this data, or people in the community here who are patients actually kind of benefiting in any way, financial or otherwise, from the systems yet. So I think, and this is true in India, you see it in Latin America and Africa, and it's this sense of sort of exploitation of people for the data without them receiving the benefits of technology in return.
Yeah. There are some really horrific instances in your book that show what the misuse or even just the ill thought of use of AI can do. There are these instances of women who found pornographic deepfake videos of themselves online. Then there are stories of families from racial minorities who are already over-policed, then facing even more stigma and more policing because of algorithms that have been created by the government, are being used by the government. Do you think that the pace at which this technology has developed and has been released in certain ways has meant that people who are thinking about things like the human rights costs of it, or what the ethics of it, of the associated impact may be, are stuck playing catch up in a way?
Yeah, so I think there's the term AI can be really confusing, right? Because it's really a marketing term that's labeled on lots of different types of technology. But a lot of the instances I look at in my book are largely decision-making systems, right? And those are replacing social decisions, whether that's by police or in healthcare or at work. And often, what happens there is an over-reliance on a statistical system to the detriment of the humans at the heart of it. And you talked about the policing example. That was in Amsterdam, where the mayor's office decided to create lists of young boys who would go on to commit a serious crime in the future, like the film Minority Report, and with really sort of harmful consequences to them and their families.
Yeah, in fact, the story you cover, it was a boy who had never, in fact, one of them had never committed a crime, and then went on to, after being put on the list.
He was simply the brother of a boy who had committed 2 crimes, but was kind of put on this list, and it pushed him towards it, which I think if any of us has ever been or known a teenager, that's what it's like, being told you're going to do something pushes you, further the other direction. And so I think that there is this pace of change, and we are, many more of us are noting that now when it comes to chatbots and generative AI, because it's being rolled out into consumer products, into Microsoft products and Google products, so we can see the pace. But this has already been happening over the last 5 to 7 years, and every example in my book is something where AI has already been embedded into our society and has already impinged on different aspects of our lives. And it's moved so not just quickly but quietly, and without us keeping pace in terms of regulation, in terms of, forget regulation, even guardrails around the system. If you're going to put an AI system into recruitment, who's checking whether there are errors coming out of it? Who's accountable for the decisions that it makes? We haven't thought about those very human parts of it, because we have this, the sense that it's a magical, automated technology that is better in some way than us, or more intelligent or more capable. But I think I find it actually quite hopeful that you now do have human rights researchers, activists, ethicists, philosophers who are coming into this conversation, who are really starting to question how we are just implementing it blindly. And as you say, in many cases, it isn't necessarily the technology that's flawed, although it can be, but it's often how we let it impact people and how we protect victims who happen to be harmed by it. That leads to the harms of AI.
Yeah, I was thinking from what you just said, it seems like in some ways it can, the AI technology and its use can in some ways create a loop where existing biases are going into it, but then the use of the technology is being used to justify that bias in a way, like reinstating it in some ways, particularly in the policing example that, you're saying that, oh, if there's this theory that all these racial minorities living in this certain neighborhood, boys of this certain age, are likely to go in, and you can say that no, that's the police bias, and there's a reason. But then the police will say, no, it's not us, it's this non-human algorithm that has said it's these children, and it's not us saying it. And in some ways that's supposed to grant this sort of objectivity to this fact, when we're then in fact not looking at where this algorithm is coming from, what is the data that has fed it, who has fed it, what are the decisions that are being made. Do you think that happens, that it's being sold as more objective than it possibly can be?
Absolutely. I think, that we know that there are areas where human biases play a role, right? Like, so when you think about criminal justice, we know that judges can be extremely biased based on not even just who they are or where they're from, but even things like whether it's before or after lunch, like hunger can play a role, etc., mood, all of that. Same with doctors. You can make more errors at certain times of day and so on. So we know that the way our society functions is flawed, and bias isn't even negative, right? Every single one of us comes to anything in our lives with our own lens, which is a bias. But as you say, all of that is codified into AI systems, and yes, the hope is that because this system is being trained on data at scale, it somehow can, paper over those biases and pull out patterns that will sort of make things much more objective. And I can see why. So if you do collect enough data, maybe you are able to sort of account for those biases and also correct them. But I think what we don't realize is that once we use AI, we're actually scaling up the decisions, right? So whereas with humans, it's that one judge, or one doctor, an AI system can affect millions of patients if it's rolled out in a hospital or an entire city, or even a country, right? And so it's the scale of it that where the issue comes in. So even if the biases are smaller or different, no system is perfect. No software system, no mathematical statistical system is ever going to be completely 100%. And when it does make errors, it's far from infallible, and we understand that even from a technical level, that it falls over, it makes mistakes, as you say, based on the data it was trained on. So what happens when it goes wrong? And that's the difference between a human sort of error and an algorithmic error, where with algorithms or computers more broadly, we have a sense of trust the machine. Computer says no. This sort of automation bias, as we call it, and that can show up anywhere from sort of pilots and autopilot in a plane to even night watchmen or guards who start to rely on surveillance cameras over their own inherent instincts. And so we've seen that again and again. And so why should AI be any different? It isn't. But we go into it with that sense of trust, and I think that's what needs to change. If we view it as simply a tool that's assisting a human expert, I think you could actually prevent many of the harms that I see in terms of the biased outcomes, because you simply see it as one other tool in your toolkit. But today it's really seen largely as a cheaper replacement for humans.
One of the themes that came up for me while reading your book was this sort of creation of distances. The first was this instance of when you spoke to these Uber Eats drivers who didn't know who their boss was. All their interactions were with an app with automated responses. It took a lot of time to ever get anyone on the phone, and even then it wasn't like you didn't really know who they were in any way. And then in a sort of separate way, there were these content moderators working for big social media companies, Meta and others, who were looking at a lot of very traumatic content on a daily basis and not getting paid a lot for it. But in addition to that, they were signing non-disclosure agreements that basically meant they couldn't speak to anyone about the things they were seeing and how it was affecting them in some ways, sometimes very deeply. Do you think that the way this technology is developing, it's encouraging isolation of some sort?
Yeah, one of the key kind of threads for me through reporting the lives of these 10, 11 people was this question of agency, of this sense that we as humans have of being able to change our own circumstances, have a voice and make a change in your life. And that is what I found was weakening on some individual level with AI systems, because you can see it even with something as widespread and sort of rudimentary as a recommendation algorithm on a Netflix or a Amazon Prime Video, whatever, where you're not making choices of what you're watching. You're pretty much being shown a small subset of what the algorithm believes that you will like, and you don't ever see what's outside the universe of that content, and so you start to kind of be guided by it. And increasingly we're going to see this with AI systems in personal communication, as it becomes part of our work. And I think it does isolate us from one another, because you don't have a shared reality, and there's no sort of common basis from which you can both understand. Even when there are errors, with human errors, we understand what that human bias is and therefore how to account for it, right? But because
and
AI,
you can also ask.
yeah, you can ask and or you maybe can surmise, but with AI systems, they are black boxes. Especially the more sophisticated they get, the creators of the systems find that they don't understand really why some of the outcomes are the way they are. Why does ChatGPT give you the answer it gives you, or how does it go wrong? Can we predict when it starts to make up facts? And so far, it isn't clear. So the more we start to get locked out of them, of the software that's part of our lives, I think that isolates us more. And there's also the question of trust too, which can be or mistrust. And I think in an era where, AI can generate content, and when I say content, it's like words that we read or images that we are seeing, and we can't tell if they're real or fake. Trust breaks down in each other, and I think that can be quite isolating as well, as a community. And that's kind of one of the downsides of the technology.
But on the other hand, one of the more positive parts, the part of your book that has the most positive outlook, is when you're talking about healthcare systems and how AI particularly has the capability to help doctors working with very limited resources, not in any way replacing them, but assisting them, like you said, assisting an expert in doing their work. I wonder if this positivity also came based on who you were speaking to, because they were both very conscientious, well-meaning medical professionals who truly wanted to make a difference, reduce inequalities in the existing healthcare system. Could it also have a different side to it? I ask because I know just last week in the US there were protests by nurses who were saying that there are AI systems that are being put into their daily work and which they say have not been properly tested and are devaluing the jobs that they do. Do you think that's potentially true?
So the harms that I saw through my reporting caused by AI, they have common threads. And as I said, one of those is that the sort of devaluing of human expertise, and instead placing this sometimes unearned trust onto an AI system that, in this case, as the nurses say, hasn't been properly audited, hasn't been tested. But I do feel that the opportunity that AI presents, particularly in the space of medical sciences and healthcare, not to compare that it outweighs it, but I think that it can have this life-changing potential if we can fix the issues around it that we know. That, for example, the agency issue and the accountability issue. And the main thing there is it's able to do, part of a job of a professional, that in many cases people don't have access to that expertise. So the story there was of Dr. Ashita Singh, who's in rural Maharashtra, and who, her patient community are the Bhil Adivasi community, many of whom travel hours to see a doctor, and many of whom are dying of tuberculosis, which is a curable disease. And the government here has an amazing apparatus to identify, to test, and to catch this. But there are communities that are so remote that they are not able to be part of that system. And so imagine if you could have mobile vans going out into the foothills of Everest or into forests and so on, places where there isn't access, where you can catch these treatable diseases and cure them, right? And it's not even just for the inequalities, it's also trying to solve medical mysteries that we haven't been able to so far. I talk about the case of pain, how it differs amongst different ethnicities in the US, and how nobody had quite been able to figure out why, but how there was a doctor who used AI systems to actually better predict why certain African American communities feel pain differently to Caucasian. So we can actually learn new things and break new ground, and help people in ways we hadn't been able to do before, and so I think that if we can focus on that, and as you said, the characters I focus on, they have a very strong moral compass. They're very ethical individuals, and yes, they're doctors, so I guess that comes with the with the job. But you find those across many other areas. You see those in local government services, in employment, in all of these different areas, and I think that's the key. We often rely on computer scientists who are building the systems to also kind of bake in these ethical choices and moral decisions, and that it's not just that they can't do it, it's we need other voices to be part of it if it's going to affect patients and employees and so on, nurses. So that the key is having different perspectives, and people with a compass.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing of it really makes a difference whose hands it's in, comes across in that section. Also because I was thinking that, like you said, if you could scale this up in the public healthcare system, that could make a huge difference. And then again, it would have to be a decision that was made by someone who understood that this investment couldn't come at the cost of cutting other public healthcare costs, or other expenses to the public exchequer. So yeah, no, absolutely. The diversity of voices in it could, I'm sure, make a huge difference. I really liked what science fiction author Ted Chiang said to you about how we're giving AI a lot more credit than it's due. No, not his exact words, I'm paraphrasing, but basically that, we're almost treating it as if it's sentient. And that is a part of the problem, in that it's an overselling of what it can do and what it is doing. And I think particularly with this whole boom of ChatGPT and everyone having access to it in some small way, I think that perhaps is true. And maybe not having that oversold sort of belief in it could be a starting point to try and figure out how to use it better, use it differently. So as the last question, I wanted to ask you, what for you is the best case scenario going forward? What would change?
So, I think that we should utilize AI. So that's the first step. Even though my book is full of stories, unexpected, unintended consequences, many dark. But for me, the outcome is we should find a way to harness this, because this is kind of part of what pushes us as a species, right? Progress, discovery and innovation. And this is part of it. This could be one of our greatest inventions if it works well. Yes, it's not sentient. It's not in any way conscious. Maybe we don't even call it intelligence. That itself, as Ted Chiang said, is a poor choice of words, because intelligence implies cognition in some way. It's statistics at the end of the day. It's powerful though. But, it is able to pull out patterns that are invisible to humans, and it can be an amazing augmented resource where we are really under-resourced everywhere, from government to health and all over the world. So, the first thing is I hope that it is harnessed and we do find a way to use it. But the second thing is around, us, each country, or maybe as a global community, we need to figure out what sort of AI system we want to live alongside. And this is why the subtitle of my book is Living in the Shadow of AI, but really I want us to think about how we can live with AI, come out of the shadow to co-evolve alongside it. And I think the best case scenario is acknowledging that this is not a neutral technology. This is not a calculator. Just because you code it with zeros and ones, it has ethical implications. It has real world impact on how we relate to each other and to the state and to our community. And to acknowledge that means to include people from outside of California and China, which are the two sort of hubs, mostly California at the moment, to include voices outside of the engineering community and the experts in those various, nurses, writers, artists, and so on, social workers, so that we can, create an ethical system that, has the right kind of guardrails in place, where we're just not allowing these harms to occur without even acknowledging them or noticing. That would just be sleepwalking into it. So that was the whole goal of the book, to say this is happening. Now what are we going to do about it?
Okay, well, I think, we're all going to find out whether we like it or not in the years to come. Thank you so much for joining me and for taking the time to do this.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
द वायर के और वीडियोस देखने के लिए सब्सक्राइब करें और बेल आइकन पर क्लिक करें। स्वतंत्र पत्रकारिता की आर्थिक मदद करने के लिए डिस्क्रिप्शन में दिए गए लिंक पर जाएं और अपनी राशि चुनें।